All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're going down south.
Down south.
Yeah, to explore the story of Maurice Bessinger and his iconic Maurice's Piggy Park barbecue chain
Yeah.
in South Carolina. And we've got a whole bunch of sources for this one.
Oh.
We've got Wikipedia articles, legal case details, even some breaking news.
Wow.
And trust me, this one is a lot more than just barbecue.
It really is. What I find so interesting is how Bessinger's life and business get really intertwined with the civil rights movement,
Oh, wow.
leading to legal battles and a controversy that continues today.
That's wild. Okay, so before we get into all that, let's start with some basics. Maurice Bessinger, along with his brother, opened the first Maurice's Piggy Park back in 1953.
Okay.
And their South Carolina-style barbecue, which is known for its slow-cooked vinegar-based sauce, quickly gained a reputation for being some of the best in the U.S.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking national recognition awards and even landing on best-of lists across the country.
Wow, their barbecue is legendary.
It is.
And Bessinger was a really smart businessman, too.
Okay.
His Carolina Gold BBQ sauce in particular was like a genius move. It helped his business become the biggest barbecue operation in the entire U.S. by 1999.
Wow. Going from a single restaurant to the biggest in the country in under 50 years is incredible. How did he do that? What were some of his business strategies that led to that growth?
Well, the Carolina Gold sauce was a huge part of it. It became a really popular product, not just in South Carolina, but all over the country.
Oh, wow.
Bessinger also focused on a strong brand identity,
Yeah.
Emphasizing the quality of his ingredients and that unique flavor of his barbecue.
So he really tapped into something special, both with the food and the marketing.
He did.
But as we mentioned earlier, there's another side to this story that is a lot more complicated and controversial.
Yeah.
Bessinger's personal beliefs about race and segregation really cast a dark shadow over his business.
That's right. He was a very outspoken segregationist. His restaurants refused to serve African Americans.
Wow.
And that led to a lawsuit in 1964 filed by Ann Newman. She was an African American minister's wife who was denied service at Piggy Park.
It's just hard to believe that could happen in a country that values equality for everyone. What was his reasoning behind that?
Well, he argued that his refusal to serve Black customers was because of his religious beliefs.
Interesting. Using religion to justify discrimination.
It definitely raises questions about interpretation and using faith to support biases. This case actually went all the way to the Supreme Court
Oh, wow.
as Newman v. Piggy Park Enterprises, Inc., and it was a pivotal moment in the fight for civil rights.
Wow. Okay. So let's get into that landmark legal battle.
Yeah.
What were the key arguments that both sides presented, and how did it turn out?
All right, so Numi's lawyers argued that Bessinger refusing to serve her violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964,
Right.
which prohibited discrimination in public places. But Bessinger claimed that his right to religious freedom was more important than the law and that he could run his business according to his beliefs.
So it was really a conflict between individual rights and the idea of equality in the law. So what did the Supreme Court decide?
Thankfully, they sided with Newman. Their decision in Newman v. Piggy Park wasn't just about this one restaurant, though. It set a really important legal precedent, making it clear that segregation in public places was against the law all over the U.S.
That's huge. It must have been a huge victory for the civil rights movement.
It was a huge win. It sent a really strong message that discrimination based on race wouldn't be allowed. But the court's decision went even further.
Oh.
It decided that courts could also make the losing side in these cases pay for the winner's lawyers.
I'm curious, why was that part of the ruling so significant?
It was a total game changer for future civil rights cases.
Okay.
Before this, a lot of people who experienced discrimination couldn't afford to sue.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But letting courts award legal fees to the people who won these cases really evened the playing field.
Wow.
It meant that people who couldn't afford lawyers could now challenge discrimination, which made access to justice a lot fairer.
Wow. So this story about a barbecue restaurant in South Carolina had a much bigger impact on the whole country.
It did. It shows how even small acts of discrimination can have huge ripple effects that go way beyond the original situation.
Wow.
And it shows how powerful the legal system can be in creating positive social change.
It is fascinating how a barbecue restaurant became the center of such important issues. But you mentioned that the controversy didn't end there.
It didn't.
What happened next?
Fast forward a few decades to the year 2000 when South Carolina removed the Confederate flag from its state house.
Oh.
And Bessinger, in a very public act of defiance, raised Confederate flags at his restaurants.
Really?
Yeah, it was almost like he saw taking down the flag as a personal attack.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought it was him supporting racism
Right.
and that he wouldn't admit to the history of the Confederate flag.
What did he say about putting up the flags?
He said they were a Christian symbol and that they represented fighting back against tyranny.
So he was saying it was about Southern heritage and not...
Yeah.
But it's still connected to slavery and racial oppression, so it's a tough argument.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't believe him. Big grocery chains all over the country saw it as supporting racism.
Oh, wow.
So they stopped selling his Carolina gold sauce.
Wow.
People started boycotting, and the media covered it a lot.
Yeah.
This brought a lot of attention to the whole debate about free speech and corporate responsibility.
It must have been hard for the grocery stores. They had to choose between making money and standing up against racism.
Exactly. They had to decide what was more important to them, money or doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of them felt they couldn't sell something connected to those views.
It's a really good example of how people and businesses can make a change together. Did Bessinger say anything about the boycotts?
He did. He felt his rights were being violated.
Okay.
So he sued some of the grocery chains, saying they were messing with his freedom of speech.
Interesting that he called it a free speech issue. What happened with the lawsuits?
He lost.
Yeah.
The courts said that the grocery chains could choose not to sell his products.
Oh. It shows that you can say what you want, but there might be consequences.
It seems like this whole thing shows the complicated relationship between personal beliefs, business, and what people think.
Absolutely. It shows how actions can have unexpected results, especially when people are more aware of social justice.
Okay.
And that brings us to another part of the Piggy Park story. In 2014, Bessinger sold some of his Piggy Park property in Orangeburg, South Carolina.
Okay. What's important about that spot?
Well, the sale was normal, but what he sold and who he sold it to brought up all the controversy again.
Yeah.
It included a big Confederate flag and flagpole that he sold to the Sons of Confederate Veterans.
Wow, that's a statement. It seems like he was making one last public show of his beliefs.
It did seem that way.
Yeah.
Especially after the Charleston church shooting in 2015.
Right.
It brought back a lot of tension and arguments about Confederate symbols today.
Yeah.
It became a big focus for discussions about race history and heritage.
It's interesting how a symbol can bring up so many emotions and reactions. So what happened to the rest of the Orangeburg property? Tommy Darris bought it and opened an ice cream shop there.
An ice cream shop right next to a Confederate flag. That sounds like a problem waiting to happen.
It was a really tough spot for Darris. He got caught in the middle of everything.
It must have been really stressful. Did he try to do anything about the flag?
He did. He tried to have it taken down. He said it hurt his business and made people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He even sued, but he lost.
It sounds like a clash of values and legal issues.
Yeah.
What were the reasons for keeping the flag up?
The Sons of Confederate Veterans owned the land where the flag was.
Okay.
And they said it was on private property so they could do what they wanted with it.
Mm.
They also said it was important to Southern history and didn't represent hate.
It's the same thing Bessinger said about the flags at his restaurants.
Mhm.
It seems like it's more than just a flag. It's about beliefs, about history, identity, and being Southern.
Exactly. It makes us think about how we deal with the hard parts of our past. How do we balance our history with our values today?
That's a big question.
How do we balance free speech with making everyone feel safe?
Those are tough questions. Seems like Darris got stuck in all of this.
He did, and it hurt his business. People stayed away because of the flag, and he got criticized a lot.
Oh, wow.
He ended up selling the property in 2019. He couldn't make everyone happy.
It shows that even today, the past can affect people's lives.
Yeah. And speaking of the past, that brings us to the latest development in the Piggy Park story.
Okay, what happened?
On October 26, 2024, a fire broke out at the Maurice's Piggy Park on Charleston Highway.
Wow, that's a coincidence considering we're talking about it today. Do we know what started it?
They're still investigating, but we know that several fire departments responded,
Okay.
and the offices and cookhouse were badly damaged.
Wow.
Luckily, nobody was hurt.
That's good. But it's still a big deal, especially the timing. It happened just after the anniversary of Bessinger's death.
It does feel symbolic. What will happen to this place?
Will they rebuild it? Or will they do something new?
It's hard to say what will happen, but one thing's for sure, Maurice Bessinger and his Piggy Park will keep people talking.
You've really shown how complicated and controversial this restaurant chain is. It's amazing how one place can represent so many bigger social issues.
Yeah, it's amazing how one restaurant chain can show us so much about ourselves as a society. We've talked about race, religion, business ethics, freedom of speech, the Confederacy, and even the symbolism of fire.
Yeah, Maurice's Piggy Park is more than just a place to give barbecue.
Right.
It shows who we are as a society, the good and the bad.
And it reminds us that the past isn't really over. It still affects us today and influences our future.
Yeah. The choices Bessinger made in his business and his personal life had a big impact on his community and beyond, and they still make people talk about race history and what progress really means.
You know, thinking about Ann Newman's courage in fighting segregation reminds me of other people who fought for civil rights. People who, even though things were really tough, stood up for what they believed in and helped create a more just world. Absolutely. We don't hear their stories enough, but they're really important to understand how change happens. It's often those small acts of courage, the everyday people who say no to the way things are, who really make a difference.
It makes you think about what choices will be remembered for.
That's a good question. We should all think about how what we do, big or small, makes the world better or worse.
So as we finish up our deep dive into Maurice's Piggy Park,
Mm-hmm.
what are some key things our listeners can take away? What can we learn from this complicated story?
I think one of the most important lessons is that progress isn't always straightforward.
Okay.
There will be setbacks, challenges, and disagreements. Fighting for equality is a marathon, not a sprint.
And sometimes people who hold on to the past do it because they're afraid or feel like they're losing who they are.
Yeah,
It's easier to stick with familiar things than to face uncomfortable truths and accept change.
that's a great point. It's also important to remember that we're always looking at history in new ways,
Right.
and as new generations grow up, they bring different ideas and challenge old ways of thinking.
Like Bessinger's children taking down the Confederate flags after he died. It shows that change is possible, even in families and organizations that have believed certain things for a long time.
For sure. And the fire at that location, even though it's sad, could be a chance for something new, a chance to rethink the past, think about new possibilities, and build a future that's more inclusive and fair for everyone.
So for anyone listening who's feeling discouraged by the past, just remember that you can help create the future. Everything you do, every action you take, contributes to the story of our society.
Yeah, and don't forget the power of talking and understanding. Even when we disagree, it's important to listen to different viewpoints, have conversations, and find common ground.
Maurice Bessinger's story is full of contradictions, complexities, and unanswered questions. But it also makes us think about what we believe, question our assumptions, and imagine the world we want to live in.
We hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about and inspired you to keep exploring these important topics.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep diving deep.